Hi everyone, this is Steven, and in this video I wanted to show you how I can set up some eyes with some eye look controls for this character that I've been creating in Maya. A couple things to point out is I've used this human IK toolkit to create the character and create the rig and skin the character. So if I select these controls, you can actually see that I've got some head movement that's rotating at the neck here. If you don't see these controls, so these are the FK controls, so I can actually select this and rotate this and get a rotation of the head. But because this is a full body human IK, I can actually select this control and it immediately switches to an IK mode, so I can move the head around. And you can see you get some nice deformation in the head here. That does pose some interesting problems for creating the eyes, but I'll show you my approach to doing this and what I find that kind of works. The first thing is if you don't see these FK controls or the IK controls, you need to go over the Human IK toolkit and make sure these two are on. So this will show the forward kinematic controls. This will show the inverse kinematic controls. What I do for this process, I do need to show the actual skeleton. So I'm going to click this button right here that shows the skeleton, and I'm going to hide the control rigs. Right? So I'm going to start with this and kind of show you my process for doing this. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to add another joint to the head so I can control where the eyes are going and keep it parented to the head. So you'll notice that this joint goes to the top of the head, and I'm going to go to the side view and I'm going to come up here, and this is where that top joint is, and I'm going to put the eyes right around in here because I've created an inset for the eyes. For this particular character, I didn't actually create the eye sockets, but I'll show you how you can place the eyes and get that to work. I'm going to select the rigging shelf and then go to the Create Joints tool, select this top joint, and then I'm just going to go right here where it would be in between the eyes and then click right in here. And I can drag it around to kind of get a better spot if I want, you know. So I want that to be right about where the middle of the eyes are going to be. And this is going to keep those oriented with the head. And so I'm going to go back to my perspective view, and you're going to see, since I did it in the side view, it's perfectly aligned to the middle of the head in between where the eyes are going to go. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create my actual eyes. And I do this very simply by going to the poly modeling shelf and just creating a polysphere. So I'm going to create it down here at the bottom. I'm just going to kind of drag it down here. And just to mention it, I have interactive creation turned off so I can actually drag it out and create the sphere, right? So now I need to get it up here to the position where this joint is. So with that sphere selected, I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to select that joint. And then I'm going to press P on the keyboard. And what that's going to do is it's going to parent that eye, my new eye, to the joint. Now, if I look at this channel box, if you see I have this selected, you'll see that there's values. And if you've watched a previous video, you're going to see that what I can do is I can zero those out, right? So I'm going to enter 0 for all those, and it's going to pop right to where that joint is. Because it's parented, you take out the zeros, that's where it lives. That is its new default location. Now I don't want to keep it parented to that joint, so with that sphere for my eye selected, I'm just going to press Shift and P, and it's going to unparent it, but keep it in the same location. You're going to see that it's got values here for its new position. So I'm just going to drag this over where I believe that eye should go. Now I want to duplicate this eye on the other side. One of the easiest ways to do this is to use the duplicate special command. So it's duplicate special. However, I'm going to freeze these transforms, so this is all zeros right now. And to point out a couple things, I have the y-axis pointing straight out, and it's right down the pole. X-axis is up, and the z-axis is to the side. That's how I have mine oriented, right? It's important for me, though, that have the poles going straight out to the front of the eyes, because when I rig this, I want that to be pointing straight out. So I'm going to go to Modify and Freeze Transformations, and that's going to set it all to 0 and keep it where it's at. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the front view so you can see this. I'm going to hold down D, hold down X, and drag that pivot point right to the center. Then what I want to do is I want to duplicate it. So I'm going to go to Edit, Duplicate Special, and go to this option box And in the option box, I've already used this on several different occasions. So by default, you will not see this -1, but I had entered that previously. If you want to reset all your settings and set it to -1, that's going to put it on the other side of this pivot point. So when I've got that, and I want to make sure it's copy and parent and not an instance, and I apply. And now it's created this other eye over here on the other side, and it's going to be equidistant from the other eye from the center, right? But I do have the pivot point in the center, and it has a -1 on the X, which is what I told it to do. Go -1 on the X, which means the same distance this is from the pivot point, make it on the other side. So I need to do a couple things. So I'm going to go to modify, and I'm going to freeze transformations. And again, it sets it all to 0 and scale to 1, right? So that they're frozen now in that space. The next thing I want to do is I want to go to modify, and I want to go to center pivot. Same thing here. Select the eye, modify, center pivot. And now the pivot point is exactly in the center of both of those eyes, right? And the next thing I want to do is I want to name them. So this is going to be my left eye. And this one is going to be my right eye, right? Left eye and right eye. Now I'm trying to follow the same naming convention I have before. So I had been spelling out left and right like that. So with this eye, now what I want to do with both eyes is I want to group them. I want to make them in a group and parent that to the joint that I put in between the eyes. Now the reason I'm making them a group is because I want to constrain that. I want to parent the group to the joint so that I can set up some controls when I rotate the eyes. When I set up an aim constraint to these eyes, they're going to point straight at that. So with that eye selected, I'm actually going to copy that name. And then I'm going to group it. So Control G to group. And then for that group, I'm going to paste in that and type in GRP for group. That's my naming convention whenever I create a group. Same thing here. Control G. And then I can just copy that and put that in GRP. So now I have these eye groups. Now I'm going to parent the groups to that joint. So I'm going to go to the perspective view just so I can see this a little bit better. With the group selected, I'm going to shift select the joint and then press P on the keyboard. So it's parented. Then again, this one, and if I just select the eye and go up one, I'm on the group. And then I'm going to shift select the joint and press P on the keyboard. Now, after I do that, you're already going to see, and I'm going to go back to the Human IK Toolkit, and I'm going to turn off the skeleton and turn both of these back on. So the IK and FK controls. And I'm going to move this IK control around. And you see that the eyes are sticking to the head, right? And even the FK control, when I move this, the eyes are moving with the head, right? A nice look to it, right? Now I'm not quite done. There's a couple things that I need to do, including rigging it, but I also want to make them look like eyes. And I'm just going to go over to my mesh, my character mesh, and I'm going to hide it. I'm just going to press H on the keyboard. When I go to show that back up, I can just select that and press H again. It's going to show up. I can just do that right from the outliner. So now that I've got my eyes connected, I'm going to select one of them, press Q on the keyboard, and I want to give this a texture that's going to look like an eye. So I'm going to go to the attribute editor. I have some history on this. So what I can do at this point in time is I'm just going to go ahead and edit and delete by type history. Not delete all by type, but delete by type history. And you see it gets rid of some of those nodes. Now this one didn't need it because it didn't have the original construction history. So you're going to see that now I've gotten rid of any history on those. You also see it's attached to the Lambert 1, and I don't want to add any textures to these eyes with the Lambert 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, I'm going to go down to New Material, I'm going to go to the Arnold menu. If you're using Arnold, if you're using another render, you can use a Maya material. The best thing to do would either be a Fong or a Blend, but in this case, since I'm using Arnold, I'm going to use the AI standard surface. And here's that surface now applied. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change these names so they make more sense. So this is shading group for the eye. I'm going to go to the surface. And by the way, I'm hitting enter every time I change this field. If you don't, you can type, and I'll call this material I. And if I just click out of it, you'll see that it didn't change the name, right? So I have to make sure that I hit enter or return or tab to get out of that field to accept that. So if you don't, it's just not going to change the name. So I want to make sure my naming convention makes sense, and so that when I see that material, I know exactly what it's doing. Now in color for this, and I can bump up the metalness just a little bit. So I think I'm going to take it to 5 because the eyes are going to be kind of glassy. And I'm going to go to this color attribute. In the color attribute, I'm going to click the little map button. It opens the create render node window. And in this window, I can choose a different texture. One of the easiest things to do for eyes is I'm going to use what's called a ramp. And a ramp is like a gradient. By default, this gradient goes from black to white on this side. And it's set to a V ramp. So you're going to see right away when I spin this around, it's a little bit darker, but I need to turn off X-ray to see it. The other thing you'll notice is it doesn't look anything like this. So if I move this down, you don't really see anything. So I'm going to make sure, I'm going to press 6 on the keyboard to make sure it's using the proper shading. And now you can see it's dark on one side and lighter on the other. One thing what it's doing is it's creating a gradient from here to here. So instead of doing it in linear, what is called a linear interpolation from here to here, from white to black, I'm going to choose none. And what it's going to do is it's going to give me a solid line, right? And so I'm going to actually click the little box down here to close the black, to close one of those selections. And I can just click anywhere in here to make a new one. Now, once I have that selected, moving it around, I can move it around with this little dot up here. I can choose the selected color, right? And so for this one, let's say I'm going to make some green eyes, right? And I'll put it right about here. So I can kind of turn around and look and see where that's winding up. Now inside of that, I need to make a pupil. So I had previously deleted the block. I could just have moved it over and used that as the pupil, but I'm going to show you how I can reset it. So I create a new one just by clicking anywhere in here, and it creates a new area where I can define a color. And I'm going to click down here at the selected color and choose black. And now I can drag that around to make whatever size I need to for that eye. Now, one thing I wanted to point out is these are very simple eyes. They're not going to have a lot of pupil dilation. There's different ways you can make a dilating pupil and do different things. But in this case, the way that I'm setting it up is just going to be this one default size and color and everything. So once I have that set up, I can go over to this one. I can right click and go down to assign existing material, go to material eye, select it, and now I have two eyes that have the identical material. Right, so now I've got two eyes that I didn't even need a painted texture for. I just assigned it different regions based on the ramp. So if I want to go back to that, I can look at that, go to the color, select that little arrow, and then I can go ahead and change it. I can change that to a different color. If I change it to say blue, then they're both blue. If I change it again and maybe I want it to be a little bit of a lighter blue, I can set that up, right? But again, I can go back to green. I can even make them some fairly bizarre colors, right? But I'm going to leave it at that. Now, with this all set, I actually can grab this, and you can see that I'm moving my eyes, right? So the next thing that I need to do is now I'm going to rig these so that I can move the eyes around and make it look like the character is looking at something. And I'm going to create an eye look controller out of a couple different objects. And so I'm going to go to the rigging shelf, and what I'm going to be using is a locator. So I'm just going to create a locator. I'm going to go to my top view, and you're going to see it's created this sort of crosshair look right in the middle of the scene, right? So what I'm going to do with that in the attribute editor, I'm going to change this local scale to 001, and you're going to see that it gets a little bit smaller. And this is the construction history. This is the locator's shape node. So 001, and I can put 0.001, and then it makes it a 1 by 0.001 by 0.001, right? And then here's my locator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this left eye look, and then I'm going to go back to my perspective view with the eye look controller selected I'm going to hold down Shift and select the eye and press P for parent. And then I'm going to go to the channel box. With the eye look controller selected, I'm going to Shift select the joint that's for the eyes, and I'm going to press P on the keyboard for parent. With that, you'll see that that controller is still selected, right? But the joint is not, but it has values. Again, so I'm going to zero those out, and the controller pops right up to the top. But I want these to be centered within the eyes. So there's a neat little trick that I can show you to make sure that they're centered. With that locator selected, I'm going to hold down Shift and P to unparent it from that joint. And then with the controller selected, I'm going to hold down Shift and select the eye. Then I'm going to go up to Modify and go to Match Transformations. And I'm going to go Match All Transformations. And when I do that, you'll see that that locator pops right to the eye. Then I can select that locator again, and I can duplicate it. And if you want, I can Control D to duplicate and make sure that's called right eye. Right? And then I could do the same thing with that locator selected. Shift select the eye, go to Modify, Match Transformations, Match All Transformations. And then it just pops it right in the middle. As long as the pivot point for the eyes and the locators are in the same spot, that's where they're going to match up, is that pivot point. So now I've got these locators that match exactly to the eyes. I'm going to go to the top view, but I don't want them to be right in the middle of the eyes. I need them to be forward. So I'm going to select both of them, and I'm going to move them forward. And now I'm just gauging. I don't necessarily need it to be a specific distance away, but far enough away where it's going to be able to look at these controllers, right? So there I have my controllers out in front of the eyes, right? Now, next thing I want to do is I want to freeze those transformations. So what I could do is just drag across the translates, right click, go to freeze, and go to translate. And now they've zeroed out, but now they're in the same position as I left them. Now, if you really want, you can go to the attribute editor. You can make one of the scales a little bit smaller. So this is X, this is Y, this is Z. So if I wanted to make this a little smaller, I could put a 0, 1 there, you know, and make it a little bit smaller in one direction, right? But I'm just going to leave them this way for right now. And again, I'm going to go to the top view. The next step I want to do is I want to unify these two controls. So I want to be able to control each eye separately. So if I want one eye to go one direction, another eye to go another direction, I can do that. However, I want one control to go around both of them so that both eyes can be controlled together. And how I'm going to do that is, again, up at the curves surfaces, I'm going to choose a curve. Don't use the square. Even if you want it to be a square, I can show you how to modify it, but the square creates different segments and it doesn't work the same way that a circle does. So I'm using a circle. When I create that, you'll notice that it's nice and big. So I'm going to go to the construction history in the attribute editor, and I'm going to bring that down. And I'm just going to bring it down to where, you know, kind of around where it's going to cover both of those eye look controllers. Now I moved it, but I want to make sure I hold down V and snap it to where those two are. Now I can rotate it simply. I could just rotate it using the rotate tool, but I find it's easier to enter a value here. I know that this is X, this is Y, this is Z, and I want to rotate it on the Z axis and not on the Y axis. So you'll notice that it rotated, and I need to make sure that I'm out of that before I can hold the space bar down and do this. Right? And you'll notice that now, actually I'm going to go to the front view. Since this controller is way down there, right, I want to bring it up to where the eyes are. Now I could do my same little trick and, you know, match transforms, but I can also just drag it up. A lot of different ways to do things in Maya. Oop. Let me go back. I'm going to go to this view. I'm going to press F on the keyboard to frame it up, hold V to snap it, and then I can just snap it in the middle of those. If I want to modify this, I can right click and go to Control Vertex. You're going to see these little purple dots out here that I can select, and bring this down a little bit, and use to modify it. So I'm actually going to scale this down, right? I can make it even look like an interesting shape here if I want to. If I want to modify it across the X, I need to make sure I turn off the object X, or I could just leave it on, use the move tool, and then bring it out a little bit if I wanted to. So I can also bring these down if I want. Again, right click, control vertex. See that control vertex right there? I can bring this down if I want. So you can modify that if you feel like it, right? So I could modify these as well, but I kind of like that shape, so I'm going to leave it. So I'm going to right click again on top of it, go to object mode. So I'm back in the object, and then I want to go to the name of it, the transform node, and change that to eye look control. And what I'm going to do is actually put CTRL underscore in front of it, right? And I probably should do the same thing with here. CTRL underscore. And I can just copy that and paste it over here. So I've named all my other controls that way, so I need to be consistent. So now with this eye look controller, I'm going to go to the perspective view. And what I want to do is I want to make these eye controllers aim constrain the eyes. So these controllers, when I move them, the eyes will point at them. So I'm going to use an aim constraint to do that. And in this case, I'm going to select the controller, shift select the eye. Since it's in a group, it's not going to interfere with the parenting that I did. So I'm going to go to constrain, aim constraint option box. And if I reset these settings, you're going to see these are the default settings. I want to make sure that maintain offset is on. It's got to be on because the controller is going to be further away from the eye. So we need to maintain that offset. Right now the aim vector is on the X and the up vector is on the Y. So the Y is going up. The world up type is vector, just leave that. And what it's going to use is going to use this controller as its aim. So I'm just going to go ahead and click apply. Then I'm going to do the same thing here. Select the controller, shift select the eye, click apply. And I'm going to go ahead and close that. If it worked out, when I move this controller, the eye will be pointing at that controller. I want to make sure I get it back to 0 before I do the next step. And that is to parent these to the eye look controller, right? I can do this as a constraint, and I can also do this as a parent. So I'm just going to do it as a parent. So I'm going to select this controller, shift select the eye look controller, the main eye look controller, and press the P key on the keyboard. Same thing here. Select the controller, select the eye look controller or the aim constraint controller, and then shift select the eye look controller, and again press P on the keyboard. So now when I select this controller, both eyes will move, right? I can move them up and down, and I can move them around, and I can also have individual control, and I still will be able to move both at the same time. So that is how I set up eye look controllers and set up the eyes. And now if I move these around, you're going to see it's always pointing at the controller. So you can set up a constraint to go from the joint to the eye look controller, so they're always pointing, and you can turn it on and off if you want to. So to set up the constraint, the first thing that I want to do is make sure that I can zero these controls out when it's in its default position. So right now it's in the default position, but you see that it's got values, and I'm going to look at these as well, and you see these have values. So they're pulling the values from this. So what I'm going to end up doing before I move too far is I want to make sure that I go to modify. I can open up the option box for freeze transformations and apply. And I'm going to go ahead and close that. And you see those are zeroed out. And now when I select these controllers, those are zeroed out because these controllers were picking up the values from the main look controller, which had some transform values. So I need to do that before I move on and set the constraint. So with that done, when they're zeroed out, so I want to constrain the eye look controller to the joint here in the head. So when the head moves or that joint moves, the look controller is going to move as well. But I want to be able to animate it on and off. So there's a couple things, and we've done this before, where I'm going to select this controller and I'm going to group it. So Control G to group, right? I should still be able to select the controller, but if I press the up arrow key, I'm going to be in the group. So I'm going to copy that control iLook name, make sure the controller is selected, up arrow to get to the group, paste that in and type in GRP. And now with that group selected, I want to center its pivot. I want it to be centered on that. I want the pivot for the group to be the same pivot point as that controller. So I'm going to go up to modify. I'm going to go to center pivot. And now that pivot is in the center of that controller. So it's going to look like the same pivot. Select the controller. I have the iLook, up arrow. I have the group, and then I can constrain the group to the joint, and it's going to move the controller. So I'm going to select the joint first. I'm going to hold down Command, but you can also, if you're on a PC, you can hold down Control and select that group so that both are selected. So I have the joint selected and I have the group for the iLook controller selected. I'm going to go to the Constrain menu. I'm going to go to Parent because I want translates and rotations. I want to make sure the maintain offset is on because I want that group to be a distant from the joint. I don't want it to be at the joint. So I have to make sure maintain offset is on. Translates, and all rotates are selected. And I'm going to go to add. I don't need to go to apply because I don't need to keep the window open. I'm just going to add it once. And now I have that on the group. So now when I select the control, I'll be able to move the control. I'll be able to move the head, right? And then you can see the iLook controller is stuck to it. And then I can actually select the iLook and have it move independently of that head. So I'm going to undo to get it back to where it was. So now with this set up, what I can do is I can set up an attribute on the iLook controller so that I can turn this on and off so that it's constrained or not constrained, right? Otherwise, I would have to select the controller, go to the up arrow, turn off, like this is that parent constraint. I'd have to enter 0 and to turn it on and off, right? And I don't want to go through all that trouble just to animate it on and off. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select the controller. I'm actually going to hide these scale values because I never need to use them. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to go down to lock and hide selected. It hides it from the channel box. You can still key them, but they're locked, so I wouldn't be able to scale that. I don't want to be able to do that. But I want to add another attribute. So I'm going to go to Edit. I'm going to go down to Add Attribute. In the Add Attribute window, I'm just going to I'll put lock with head. And I'm going to make this a Boolean. And a Boolean is on or off. It's either on or it's off. I want to make sure it's keyable so I can key it when I'm animating, so I can turn it on and off animating it. So then I'm going to click OK. And now I've got this on and off, right? And if you enter 1, it's on. If I enter 0, it's off. Or I can type in on too. So, right? So it's not connected to anything yet. And I noticed that I didn't put a space on the width. So I'm going to go to Edit. I'm going to go to Edit Attribute. And in the Edit Attribute window, I noticed that there's a space right there in the nice name, and that's just displaying the nice name. This is a short name, right? Or this, I could just make this a different name to make it shorter, but I want this to be the displayed name. And I'm going to go to Close. And now you see that that now has a better name, lock with head. So now I'm going to go to Edit, and I'm going to set driven key. What this is going to allow me to do is change the attribute on the group. Now, when you load this, since it's selected, it's put it into driven, but I want this to be the driver, right? This is going to be driving the other attribute. So I'm going to load driver and then select lock with head. Then with the window open, I'm going to select the control, press the up arrow key to get to the group. And then I'm going to select this where it says joint 1. So this is under the parent constraint, joint 1. What this means is it's going to be constrained on or off, changing that value as I demonstrated. So now I'm going to click load driven. When I do that, it brings in the eye look controller, but not the parent constraint, which is what I want. I want that parent constraint in there. So I need to come over here to the outliner and find that parent constraint. By the way, if you ever need to remove the constraint and add it again or add something different, you can just delete it right there, right? That'll get rid of the constraint. But with that selected, now I can come over here and load driven. You're going to see it says joint 1W0, and there's that attribute right there. That's the driven. What I need to do is confirm that when it's on 1, it's locked to the head, right? And if I select this one, you're going to see it's on. So I'm just confirming that this is set to 1 and this one's set to on, and then I can key. Now I'm going to do it again, but set this to 0 so it's off. Go to the eye look controller, set it to off. So again, I can set it to 0 to turn it off or type in off. Make sure these are all selected. I'm going to go back to look at the joint. I've got to set that to 0. Right now it's set. I can kind of go back and look, make sure that's set to off, set that to 0, key. And so now it's keyed so that these two attributes are linked. So changing this from on to off is going to change this value. So I'm going to go ahead and close that window. Now I have the eye look controller. It's set to off. So when I move this, it's not going to move with the head. Then when I select the controller, change it to on. So I can just type in on if I want. And now when I move the head, the eye look controller goes with the head. And I can animate that on and off. So remember, I'm putting that on the controller for the head. So now I have this ability to turn it on and off. With that done, I've now rigged my eyes so that they can work independently from one another. I can move the eye look controller. And now I can move the head. I can even grab the FK joint and move that. And it also moves the controller. So it all seems like it's working out really well with these eyes and this eye look controller. So I hope that helps, and good luck with your characters and your rigging.